Joining us now, Joe diGenova, WMAL legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney to the District of Columbia. Joe, good morning.
Good morning.
Joe, the shootings over the weekend, we had two within hours of each other in under 24 hours, one in El Paso, Texas, the other in Dayton, Ohio, with almost 30 people dead and over 50 people injured. The Democrats seem to, at least to me, to have kind of changed their rhetoric, moving from automatic confiscation of whatever the gun, whatever weapon happened to be used, to now talking about mental health issues, but talking particularly about red flag laws. You have Ivanka Trump coming out and asking for red flag laws in every state. Is that something that's more palatable to Republicans?
Well, of course, mental health has always been the issue in these situations. It's never been about the weapons themselves. That's easy to talk about, and of course, it solves absolutely nothing. Because the minute you take away an AR-15, the guy gets a ban and mows down 25 people on a street. So what are we going to do, ban trucks? The bottom line is this. Mental illness is at the core of all of this. In addition, every one of these cases, someone knew something, saw something, and then didn't say something. This is all about the history of people being afraid to talk about other people and inform on them for fear of retribution. What we have to do is create a culture where people feel that they can say something about somebody who is mentally disturbed and do something about it. You know, back in the 1970s, we decided we were going to end mental institutions in this country that were run as public facilities. We emptied them out as a result of a liberal litigation firm in Washington, D.C. We created the homeless population as a result of that because these people didn't take their meds. The same thing is true with shooters. There is somebody in every situation who knew this, saw this, and did nothing about it. So red flags are fine. I'm all for that. I'm all for universal background checks. But the issue here is observation and reporting. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, background checks was something that the president had raised this morning just 14 minutes ago, saying we cannot let those killed in El Paso, Texas and Dayton, Ohio die in vain. Likewise, for those so seriously wounded, we can never forget them and those many who came before them. Republicans and Democrats must come together and get strong background checks, perhaps marrying this legislation with desperately needed immigration reform. Joe, when it comes to background checks, you know, it's often we get this conversation about universal background checks.
Yeah.
But is it a good thing that we start to get the government involved in fathers giving their sons guns?
Well, obviously, personal transfers of firearms is something that's historic in the United States, handing down weapons from family to family in wills and things like that. There's a way to deal with this without getting into intra-family transfers, and you will find that in none of these cases were intra-family transfers involved. These are all about people legally buying guns, converting them, dealing with them, fixing them, but more importantly, being crazy. There are people with mental illness problems that are at the heart of all these things. No one goes out and kills 29 people without having a major mental problem. And the problem is the Democrats have avoided dealing with mental illness in the gun control context because they didn't want to, because they don't want to deal with the homeless, because they created this problem in the 1970s. So they avoid it, and they look at the weapon and say, let's get rid of that. That accomplishes absolutely nothing because that crazy person, again, will simply get a van and mow down 50 people on a street.
Joe, moving on, Representative John Ratcliffe has withdrawn being considered for the Director of National Intelligence, with the president blaming the media for this. What happened?
Richard Burr objected, said we'll never confirm him, and that was the end of it. Richard Burr, the senator from North Carolina, who's going to be in the Senate until 2022, has become the main obstacle to doing anything constructive in the intelligence community with regard to reforms because he works with Senator Mark Warner, the Democrat from Virginia, to block everything. So Ratcliffe was told, and the president was told, that Ratcliffe would never be confirmed. He wouldn't even get a hearing because Burr said, quote, he can't be confirmed. Well, maybe, maybe not, but the truth is Burr has his own candidate, and that's the woman who now is the deputy, Susan Gordon, and that's who he wants. And he doesn't want anybody the president wants. So this is going to be very interesting to watch. And who knows who's going to end up being the DNI? I have no idea at this point. It's a riverboat gamble on who's guess.
Now, Susan Gordon, isn't she a holdover from the prior administration?
She's Clapper. She's a Clapperite.
Yeah.
She was present at the conspiracy. I mean, this is a woman who knew everything, was aware of stuff, and she sits there astride the universe now and could very well be the next director of national intelligence. Well, la-di-da. Look who gets rewarded when all is said and done.
Do you think President Trump would reward her with that position, or can we continue with maybe someone as an acting position?
There's only so much conflict even this president can take. You got to have a functioning intelligence community, even though it may be functioning against you. But the truth is, I'm not sure how much of a stomach the president has for a prolonged fight over the director of national intelligence. There have been lots of conversations about people. There's a great candidate who's now the U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands, Pete Hoekstra, who was on the Intelligence Committee in the House for more than 8.5 years. He was chairman for 6 years. He's an amazing candidate, but I have no idea whether or not he would be considered. But the bottom line is, this is coming at the end of an administration. There's only so much time left. You have to have a functioning intelligence community. This is what happens. This is the deep state at play. But so we'll see what happens. I don't know. Right now, I have no idea who's going to be named.
Interestingly, Joe, last week at this time, I believe, you and I were talking about how come Wednesday there were going to be some declassified documents of last week.
Right.
And then after you and I spoke, I was beginning to hear that you were indeed right on the date, that it was supposed to be Wednesday, but that Dan Coates' departure threw a wrench in when those documents were supposed to be declassified. Have you heard anything else going about declassification and when we should expect it?
No, but I would note that Trey Gowdy over the weekend gave an interview to Maria Bartiromo on Fox in which he basically detailed what the exculpatory evidence is, which we've all known about anyway, with Papadopoulos and Carter Page. And it is that Stefan Halper and others tried to plant false intelligence in the minds and of Papadopoulos and Page and others by telling them things that weren't true about Hillary Clinton's emails and WikiLeaks and the Russians doing all this, and then making, of course, since they are informants, Halper and others, they were wearing wires with the consent of the FBI and the CIA overseas. Unfortunately, for Halper and the FBI and the CIA, George Papadopoulos and Carter Page said, we'll have nothing to do with any of this. We don't know what you're talking about. And in Papadopoulos' case, he actually said, I'm not going to do that. That would be treason. Well, of course, none of that information ever found it into the FISA application.
No, it didn't.
And, of course, the FBI had that information before it filed for the FISA applications using false information. It's amazing to me that people like Schiff can, with a straight face, continue to make arguments about this and say that the FBI and the CIA did nothing wrong.
Well, I'll tell you where else that information didn't appear. It wasn't in the Mueller report either. Joe diGenova, we'll have you stick with us. We'll get right back to you in a second.
We're joined by Joe diGenova, and we've been talking about declassification and what's come out and what's supposed to be coming out. One of the things, Joe, that happened last week that I just wanted to touch with you briefly on, George Papadopoulos said that he is going to go back to Greece. The money, that $10,000, that infamous $10,000 that he thinks the FBI was looking for in his luggage when he landed back in this country. He said that is in his lawyer's vault, and he's going to go back and get that and turn it over to see if those bills are indeed marked bills, if there's something fishy about that money. Not bringing it back, obviously a smart thing for him to do, but would they be dumb enough to mark the bills?
Now ask yourself this question. George Papadopoulos has been telling this story for over a year, and it's fairly obvious that it's true. It's in his book. He wrote about it. Why hasn't American law enforcement gone to Mr. Papadopoulos and said, Mr. Papadopoulos, we're going to go with you to Greece and your lawyer's office, and if you will allow us to take custody of that evidence, we will take it and we will analyze it. Now, either the FBI or the CIA or John Brennan or whoever or James Comey was responsible for that $10,000 in cash being delivered to Mr. Papadopoulos in an Israeli hotel. There is no doubt about it. Now, why hasn't someone in the American government gotten that money from him already? Why does he have to go to Greece, to his lawyer's office? Just ask yourself that question. Can you imagine why that hasn't been confiscated by the government as a piece of evidence?
Right. Yeah, well, how many, and every line of inquiry that's unexamined seems to be the ones that are exculpatory to Trump or the people around him. I mean, this is like, it's like, looking into the dossier and Russian disinformation. Oh, Mueller didn't do that.
Well, this story is over. When Papadopoulos returned to the United States from that famous trip, he was arrested at Dulles Airport.
Right.
And they went through his luggage and his bags and his clothes and his underwear, and they couldn't find the $10,000 that they had planted on him, which is what they were going to arrest him for. But they couldn't find it. So they had to put him in leg irons and handcuffs at Dulles Airport for a number of hours while they called headquarters to figure out what they were going to charge him with, and then they came up with some nutty charge. The bottom line is this crime has been in plain sight for at least a year, and nobody's done anything about it. Mm-hmm. So the question becomes, what's the next step? And I would imagine that Bill Barr and John Durham are doing something about it. Now, why they wouldn't go get the $10,000 is beyond me. I don't know. I'm just an old-line prosecutor. Give me some evidence. Give me some physical stuff. Let me have something to wave in front of a jury so I can help them understand what's going on. The Papadopoulos story is a remarkable story. Here's this innocent, basically doofus individual, Papadopoulos, who was a nobody, who becomes the center of a maelstrom, a storm of conspiratorial activity against a presidential candidate and then ultimately a president of the United States. And nobody's talking to the dude. To me, it's incomprehensible.
Yeah, it's interesting as to I'm curious to see what happens if he can even get anyone to even look at the money. He said he's going to bring it back and ask them to check and look at this to see if it's marked bills. It'll be interesting to see if anyone actually even does that.
All right.
Well, we'll see.
All right, Joe diGenova, thank you. Always great to talk to you, sir.
Thanks, guys.